Hi everybody, Jane here, and I decided to do a mid-month wrap-up this month. We are in March, and basically last month my wrap-up ended up being 30 minutes long, and I had read a ton of books, and I'm probably going to read about that many this month, so I decided I just couldn't do another 30-minute wrap-up, and you probably didn't want me to do a 30-minute wrap-up. So I'm doing a mid-month wrap-up now, and then I'll do a final wrap-up, hopefully with several books at the end of the month as well. The first two books I'm going to talk about, I'm not actually going to give a star rating to. They were biographies. I got them when I was looking at books for middle grade March, and I wasn't sure if I was going to read them or not, but one of the requirements for middle grade March was a nonfiction book. These are two that I got. I ended up reading, but not as the requirement for middle grade March, and just for fun on the side. So those two I'm not going to be giving a rating to. The third book I DNF'd, and I'll talk about that in depth because I kind of want to talk about why that book made me kind of mad. And then the other three books I've read so far this month are ones that I have given a rating and I will be doing a full review of at some point in the near future. So the first book I read was the biography of Virginia Hamilton, who is a children's book author. Now, I've never read any of her children's books, but she lived a really cool life. She is obviously an African-American writer, and so there's some touches on some of the things that she experienced. She was a child when there was still segregation, and she's also, by the way, from Ohio, which makes me excited because I'm in Ohio. I love books about people from Ohio. So anyway, she had a really cool life. She had a lot of things that in her childhood she kind of had to struggle through, but things turned out really well for her, and she became a famous author through so much work and so much perseverance, and I loved her story. I always love hearing stories of authors who kind of had to struggle in the beginning because, you know, I'm an author and I'm still trying to get my footing as an author. So, you know, hearing about some of the times that, you know, she was rejected or the things that didn't quite go her way, it was really nice to read. So I enjoyed it. This book has some really nice pictures. And it is a little bit text heavy. So if you are giving it to a child to read, they probably should be like 8 or 9. I don't think my 7-year-olds could be interested in something quite this long. But don't know. It was fun. I liked it. The next biography I read was Harry Houdini. This is another one that has a lot of pictures in it. And again, kind of dense text. I loved all the pictures though. I really thought this book, and it is a photographic story of a life. I thought that was really well done, and it was so fun to see all the pictures from Harry Houdini's life. I feel like most people know who Houdini is, but if you don't, he was an illusionist who basically made his living getting out of tight spots. And his story is another one with a lot of, you know, failures before he succeeded. He didn't set out initially to be an escape artist. He was learning kind of entertainment, like card tricks and stuff, and magician tricks, and that's when he learned the things that he learned to become an escape artist. So I had a really good time with this book. I never really knew much about Harry Houdini, but he was somebody who fascinated me, and this tells a little about some of the tricks he used, which was cool. I mean, just an overall fun read. So if you like Harry Houdini, worth picking up. The next book on my list was my DNF. And I was so bummed about this because this was the book I was most looking forward to reading for middle grade March, actually. And that is Secrets of Bearhaven. Now, when I initially picked this up, I thought it was going to be a fantasy, and it's actually more of a sci-fi. And that's not why I DNF'd it, but what I had expected and what I got was a little bit different. So Spencer's the little boy, and his parents are bear researchers, and they are trying to advocate for bear rights. And there are people who want to keep mistreating bears, and they kind of, like, his parents go missing, or his dad at least goes missing, and he is, like, not sure what's happening. His uncle comes to school and is all like, hey, we gotta go and get you somewhere safe. So they rush him off to this place called Bearhaven where the bears can talk. If you see these little mics around their neck, that is what allows them to talk. And these bears live like humans. They play video games. They're very humanized. And that's one thing I actually didn't like about this book is it's one thing to have like fantastic bears, but these are meant to be like wild bears who can communicate. And I didn't love that. I do think that it's important to talk about treatment of bears, and there is a lot of focus on this book on that, but I think the way it was done really bothered me. Like, because they had the bears not as these bears, not as real bears, but as very human creatures, they made them too human in this book for my taste. Just putting a device on them that allows them to talk doesn't make a bear a human, and doesn't mean that that bears have the same feelings and ideas and sentiments as us, or would want to live like us. And they do kind of touch that sometimes they'll rescue bears and the bears decide to go back to the wild, which, I mean, I feel like is a reasonable thing. Bears should live in the wild, healthy and safe and free. And a perfect life for a bear is not sitting on a couch playing video games. So I was kind of bothered by some of the elements of that. And granted, I know this is a kid's story, and so that's okay, but it just, I didn't love that. I didn't love the adventure part of it, of where I left the book was Spencer was preparing to go off and find his parents with the help of a little girl bear who's kind of annoying and kind of adorable. I still hadn't decided which. And so they are doing these training exercises that her brothers, who are soldier bears, do to kind of prepare him. So I just didn't connect with this book. I didn't like that the bears were as human as they were when they were meant to just be bears. The only thing different about these bears and regular bears is their voice synthesizer thing, and I really wanted more of a fantastic element for why these bears were such human bears. There was a couple other things that bothered me in the book, and one was that, I'm going to read this to you, the things around their neck are called bear comms. Dad says it's a sign of respect for Bearhaven to keep your bear comm on, even without humans around. He says it's an honor to have bear comms at all. He had the first one, you know. He helped invent it. Anyway, other bears turn them off sometimes, if they just want to use reggae, which is the bear language. But Mom says you have to have a good reason. I kind of have a problem with that. Like, I feel like the bears should be able to speak in their own language. Like, it's fine that they have the things to translate bear to human. That's fine. But if you are a bear and you want to talk bear, you shouldn't feel like you can't talk bear just because, you know, humans created Bearhaven and these little intercom things, and we should respect that. I didn't like that. I had a huge problem with that. And there was that kind of sentiment was kind of throughout this book. Instead of like, bears are amazing for what they are, it was a very human view of bears. Like, the bears should be grateful for all we're doing is kind of how I felt. Like, if the bears want to talk bear, let them talk bear. Especially if there's no humans around. It's not disrespectful. If you live in a society that says you have to speak this language just because the people helped you and saved you, no, I was really angry about that. Another thing, and this is just a pickiness thing, I really was bothered by their approach to physical ugliness. So let me read this. Who is she? Her expression was stony, her muddy brown eyes cold and ringed in dark circles, making her look hollowed out. Her hair hung straggly and thin around her bony face, blonde but greenish too, as if her own hair was nauseated from having to be attached to such a creepy-looking person. That made me so mad. You know, we are not it's not good to teach children to think that people are creepy looking and so they must be bad. And like, I think she is the bad guy in the book. I didn't get very far, but I think she's a bad guy. But still, a description of her own hair being nauseated because she's so creepy. I wouldn't even want to be her hair. Oh my gosh, that really bothered me. Like, so many things in this book bothered me. Now, because I don't want to be all negative, I did want to end on a positive. One of the really cool things that it did talk about was language development. And I do want to share a quote about that as well. And that is, they're talking about the Regeo, which is the language that the bears speak outside of Bearhaven. And Spencer's talking. He says, so your Regeo isn't the same other bears speak. It is and it isn't, said Fitch. Regeo is rooted in the sound that bears make, growls and grunts and so on. Most bears use those growls and grunts in more basic ways than we do, because they only need simple words for life in the wild. Here in Bearhaven, though, we've created more words so we can discuss more complicated things. He motioned to the room around them. Our language has gotten more complex as our environment has. And I do think that is a cool look at the evolution of language, because that is a real thing where, at least we assume it is, where that's kind of how language developed, is people communicated through body language and stuff, presumably primitive people. And then as life got more complex and they needed to communicate bigger thoughts, language changed and developed. And I've watched documentaries on the development of language, and it was cool to see it shown there that, you know, these bears who are now living in a very human environment have to have a more advanced language, because it's not just, hey, there's honey over there and salmon in the lake. It's, hey, do you want to go play a video game? What do you think of a video game? So that was cool. That was one of the few things I really did enjoy about this book. But yeah, Bearhaven, I DNF'd at about 100 pages. And I was so sad because this is, I thought, was going to be my favorite read of the month, and I didn't like it at all. Okay, so the next book, I'm going to go from the one I DNF'd to my favorite of my read so far, and what I assume will be my favorite of the month. And that is Sweep. This book was a 5 out of 5 for me. It says it is the story of a girl and her monster, and it is so much more and so much more complex. So I wasn't really sure what this was going into it. I thought it might be a book about a little girl and her imaginary friend. I could not have been more wrong. This is about a little girl in Victorian England. She is a sweep. She is living a horrible life as a child laborer. In her pocket, she has a clump of charcoal, and she gets stuck in a chimney and almost dies. And this chunk of charcoal turns into a golem, an actual protector monster, Jewish type golem. And that's all in the book. I'm not making that up there. She talks to a lot of Jews to try to understand about how the golem worked in the Jewish culture. So anyway, becomes a golem to protect her and save her. And then they kind of go on an adventure together to try to help the other child laborer sweeps. This book was so good, but so rough. So much emotion. I cannot even tell you, I cried through the whole thing. I think I read it in 3 hours, maybe 4, and I cried through the whole thing. I was a complete wreck. There's so much about family and friendship and love, as far as like familial love. And it was so good. As a mother, what these kids went through, and knowing that it's real, and knowing that kids actually suffered this, it just broke my heart. There was so much good showing of what life was like for kids who were in the child labor. These guys were indentured servants, but, you know, even kids who worked in factories weren't getting treated well. Or kids who, there's a little boy in this who is by himself, and he's a mudlark, which means that, you know, he spends his days digging through the mud trying to find something valuable to sell. And he sleeps under a bridge. He has nobody but his rat. And I think the realities of the horror of Victorian childhood is something we don't see, because a lot of what we see is the upper class children. And, you know, yes, they were raised by governesses, but heck, I'm pretty sure these kids would have been okay being raised by governess instead of, you know, being given a bowl of gruel to sustain them all day while they did hard labor that could potentially kill them. Yeah. This was so hard-hitting. It was so good. I am fascinated by, child labor. So I was already interested and somewhat knowledgeable about the topic. This is not by any stretch of the imagination a light read, but it was so good. If you are going to give it to a child, I would recommend an older child. This is the group read for middle grade March, and so I'm really curious to see how everybody else handled it, and if they loved it or if they were a little bit upset because, you know, looking at the cover and the fact that it's the story of a girl and her monster, I was thinking light, fluffy read. and I didn't get a light, fluffy read. Like, I loved what I got, but it wasn't what I was expecting, and it broke me. It broke my heart. It was so good, but it was so awful and hard, and a very focus on historical issues. So I loved it, but oh my gosh. One thing I did mention in my wrap-up, or in my review of it, so I'm going to mention here too, is there were a couple things that I didn't feel were very well explained. Like, I did give it a 5 out of 5 because I didn't care that they weren't very well explained. The little girl, Nan, who's the main character, there were things that she probably couldn't know. But there were a couple things in the book that I would have liked to know more about, or that I would have liked to be mentioned. One of those things that she could have known is the sweet children have this rule about we don't talk about our life before we became sweeps because it's difficult and painful. And I would have liked to see more of that. I would have liked the children to talk about their life before they became sweeps. We know what happened with Nan and how she got there. There's another little boy who we get to hear his horrific story. He was sold by his parents to be an indentured servant. But I don't think the other kids we really get a full background on, and I would have liked to know more about them. There was another character here who's a teacher, and I would have liked to know a little bit more. She's a Jewish teacher who Nan goes to about trying to learn about the golem. And she kind of mentions that she's estranged from her family, this teacher, and we never really get a full understanding of why, and I would have liked a deeper discussion of that. And then there was some stuff about the sweep. And the sweep is this character who, he's a very big part of the book, but he's only in it as a memory of Nan's. And he's the person who was raising her prior to her becoming an indentured servant. And there was a lot of questions I had about the sweep that weren't answered. And again, he's not really in the book except as memory. So I get why they couldn't be answered, but I wanted to know. So anyway, I love this book. I expect this will be the best read of the month. But it broke my heart. So if you read it, just be aware, tissue box, not somewhere you don't want to cry. So like, maybe not at your kid's ballet recital, or, not that people read there, but, maybe not in the hallway while you're waiting for your kids to finish ballet class. Just saying. All right. My next book was another middle grade book, and this was for the nonfiction or book based on a true story. And this is Dewey the Library Cat. It is a story about a kitten who was dropped through a library book drop box, and the librarians adopt him and keep him as a library cat. And he actually becomes a rather famous library cat, and I found out later, after reading this, that there is like a children's picture book series based on Dewey the Library Cat. I didn't know that. I just figured when I picked it up that he was a library cat, and I love bookstore cats. Like, I think every bookstore should have a cat. I love going into a bookstore and the kitty comes and rubs up against me and is like, "Hi, welcome to the book place." I love that. So I would love a library cat. But anyway, this is Dewey's story. It was really good. It was a 4 out of 5 for me. I don't have any major complaints about it. It's quite simply written, and there's some really beautiful pictures inside. I would say if you love James Herriot's cat stories, this is for you. And if you love this, James Herriot's cat stories is probably for you. And or if you've got a younger reader, his picture books with cat stories. This did make me cry in parts. Because I love animals, and it's definitely a book that might, get your heart if you're an animal lover. I like cats. I like dogs better, so I can't even imagine if, I loved cats. I like cats a lot, but I'm a dog person. But Dewey was really cool. It was a good book. Definitely another one that you might need some tissues, and you might cry a little, though, so be careful where you read it. And then the final book that I've read so far, and just so you know, it is the 14th, I think. I think I'm recording this on 14th, so pretty close to the middle of the month. The final book I read is a nonfiction called Some of My Friends Are. And this is one that I won through Library Things, although that will not be influencing my review at all. This is a nonfiction book about cross-racial friendships. And the author talks a lot about some of the difficulties with creating cross-racial friendships. She talks about personal experiences she's had with cross-racial friendships. It was a good book. It was really eye-opening. It really was thought-provoking. A lot of the things she'd said hadn't occurred to me, including some of the ways that I have very white views about cross-racial friendships and how that could be inhibiting some of my friendships with people who are other races. One of the things she mentioned that it never occurred to me as being a problem was white people, including myself, tend to just think, well, everybody's the same. We want to believe that. We want to be colorblind. We want to think that we are just acknowledging everybody being the same, and that's what it means to not be racist. But she says that that's actually a problem because, you know, we have this white privilege and our experience is different. And she says that most black friends want their white friends to acknowledge, you know, no, you don't know and you can't know what I've been through. So that was eye-opening for me and something I had not thought about. She also talks about the future of how future generations and how current generations are actually like, they're having more cross-racial friendships, particularly because of the internet. It's made it more easy for people who live in less diverse areas, such as myself, to have cross-racial friendships. So this book was a 4 out of 5 for me. The main complaint I had about it was that it is a very smart book. The writer's a PhD, and she writes. I had to look up some of the words. I had to really read it very slowly. I think this is not a very big book, and I think it took me about 9 hours to get through. Now, mind you, I'm a mother, so I have distractions, and so I'd have to go back and like figure out what was going on, what they were talking about, and I'm pretty sure like some of these pages I read 2 and 3 times each because I was trying to really get what was being said. But this is definitely a book that I felt it was good, but it's not very accessible. It's a little bit of a dense read. Not dense like there's too much information, but just there's a lot, and it's a lot to digest, and it's kind of difficult. And I'd say you have to be fairly educated to read it. And you know, nonfiction is hard like that. This is not one of those nonfictions that read easy. It's not one of these nonfictions that we can go through and be like, this was a great fun read, entertaining. This was a lot of information, and it was kind of like, I would love to hear her speak in a lecture or a TED Talk, but I would have liked the information just maybe a little bit more easily handed to me. I felt like I really had to work for the information she was giving me. Now, mind you, I would like to note that I just have an associate's degree. She is a PhD. She's probably a lot smarter than I am, and this book is maybe meant for people who are a lot smarter than I am. But I did enjoy it. I thought the information was important. It just took me a while to get there. All right, guys, so that has been where we are so far. Like I said, we're right around, I think we're the 14th of March today. I haven't actually checked the calendar. So I'm not sure when I'm going to be posting this, but I'll be posting it before the final wrap up. But this is already almost 25 minutes, so I'm glad. Hopefully it edits down to about 20. But, yeah, so I'm glad I did this because the end of the month wrap up could have been super long. All right, guys, this is Jane. I post Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and sometimes Saturdays. Social media and contact information is below. So is the like and subscribe button. Thank you. Bye.